The first box hadn't even made it to my living room when the street lit up red and blue 3 patrol cars sliding to a stop like I'd just robbed a bank. A neighbor stood on my lawn pointing at me, telling the cops I was breaking into a lake house. And the wild part was, the caller wasn't some random busybody, it was the president of the Homeowners Association. I'm standing there in a hoodie, sweat on my neck, holding a taped-up box that literally says kitchen. And an officer goes, "Sir, do you live here?" I hand him my ID, the keys, the paperwork from the estate, trying not to sound offended because you never want to sound offended when you're being questioned on your own porch. Behind the officers is a woman with perfect white tennis shoes, a tight little smile, and that look like she's already writing an email about you in her head. "Deborah Price," she says, stepping forward like she's the homeowner and I'm the nuisance. "President of the HOA. The cops glance at my documents. The tension drops and they apologize in that neutral way, professional but done with it. One of them turns to Deborah and says, "Ma'am, he's verified. He's allowed to be here." Deborah doesn't even blink. She leans toward me and lowers her voice like she's doing me a favor. "I don't care what you're holding," she says. "This neighborhood has standards. If you fight me, I will make your life miserable." I wish I could tell you I snapped back with some movie line. I didn't. I just watched the squad cars roll away, felt the quiet settle back over the lake, and realized my welcome to the neighborhood gift was going to be a target on my back. Silver Lake. Cove looks like a postcard, manicured lawns, little docks, boats that cost more than my car, and neighbors who wave like they're auditioning for a commercial. But the real power isn't the lake view. It's the Homeowners Association. They decide what you can park, what you can paint, what you can fix, and how much you're going to pay for the privilege of not being harassed. 2 days later, my mailbox coughed up an envelope the size of a menu. Inside was a stack of violations, 40-something pages. I'm not exaggerating. Unapproved exterior storage, vehicle not consistent with community aesthetic, structure modification not documented. Half the stuff was related to the property before I even moved in. Then I hit the line that made my jaw tighten. Past due HOA dues. They were billing me for months when my uncle was already gone, plus a late fee, plus a processing fee, plus some mysterious administrative escalation. It wasn't a bill, it was a message. I called the management number, and some guy named Kyle answered like he'd already been coached. "Yeah, so, if you don't pay within 10 days, it escalates," he says. "Board handles it. Deborah handles it." That night I sat on the edge of my bed, the lake breeze coming through the window, staring at paperwork like it was a parking ticket with a gun behind it. And I had this ugly practical thought. I've got a job, I've got a life, I didn't move here to get into a war. Maybe I just pay it, keep my head down and move on. But that's the thing about people like Deborah. You give them an inch, they start measuring your whole property line. The next punch came fast. I dragged my kayak down to the water. Nothing fancy, just a basic one so I could clear my head after work, and the next day there's a bright orange notice taped to my door. Unregistered watercraft. Fine $300. A watercraft. My plastic kayak was apparently a yacht now. I marched to the little office by the community center, and Deborah was waiting like she'd been hoping I'd show up. She slid a binder across the counter and tapped it with one manicured finger. "New rule," she says. "All watercraft must be registered with the HOA for safety." "New rule as in?" "New today," I asked. She smiled without warmth. "New rule as in effective." Then there were the floodlights. Every night like clockwork, the neighbors' security lights. Deborah's house, of course, blasted right into my bedroom windows. I hung curtains, bought blackout shades, tried to ignore it. A week later, I got another violation. Improper window coverings visible from street. I laughed out loud. It came out sharp like my body didn't know what else to do. When I tried to get a simple repair done, replace a broken exterior fixture. Nothing dramatic. Deborah's office told me I could only use approved vendors. The quote came back $400 for something any normal handyman would do for $50. I asked Kyle, "Why is it $400? He hesitated. "Because it's approved." Approved. Like my house was a theme park, and they controlled the concessions. That's when my frustration turned into something colder, not rage focus, because this wasn't about rules, it was about control and money and picking targets. So I did the thing most people don't do. I filed a formal request for the Homeowners Association's financial records. Budgets, invoices, vendor lists, board minutes, the stuff they're supposed to provide. When I dropped the request off, Deborah's face twitched. Just for a second, like she wasn't used to someone reading the fine print back at her. A week later, she called an emergency community meeting. The invite said it was about protecting the neighborhood, which is basically code for we're about to publicly shame someone. The room was packed. Deborah stood up front in a blazer like she was running for office, and she talked about outsiders declining values and a resident refusing to comply. She didn't say my name at first. She didn't have to. Everyone kept glancing at me like I was the guy who brought fireworks to a funeral. Then something unexpected happened. A guy in the second row, Tom Reynolds, I'd seen him walking his dog, stood up and said, "Deborah, you called 911 on the new owner. That's not protecting anything." A woman behind him, Janet Moore, added, "You've been handing out fines like candy for years. Some of us are tired." An older man near the back, Walter Briggs, lifted a folder and said, "And some of us keep receipts." Deborah's smile tightened. "This is not the time." Tom cut her off. "No, it is." That was the moment the room shifted. You could feel it. People weren't cheering or clapping. It was subtler than that. It was the sound of a group realizing they weren't alone in being fed up. After the meeting, Janet pulled me aside and whispered, "Check her own yard. She doesn't follow half the rules she enforces." So I did. And sure enough, midday on a watering restriction day, Deborah's sprinklers were running like a fountain show. I filmed it, calmly, no drama, just a timestamp and a clear shot of her house number. Then I made a few calls about that approved vendor list. Same service, same parts outside our little bubble, $50. Inside Silver Lake Cove, $400. And one of the businesses was registered to, you guessed it, someone connected to Deborah. Still, none of it felt like enough to stop her, because she had one more weapon, the money lever. A notice hit every mailbox in the neighborhood. Emergency assessment, $800 per household. No detailed report, no bids, no breakdown. Just pay within 30 days or enforcement actions begin. People panicked. I watched neighbors who'd ignored me before suddenly treat me like I was contagious, like my presence was the reason they were about to lose their pool access. And I'll be honest, that was the lowest point. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I could see how this game works. If the crowd turns, you don't lose an argument, you lose your life in that community. I looked at that lake I'd been excited about, and all I could think was, I moved into a beautiful place that feels like a trap. That night, I went through my uncle's files again, not because I believed in miracles, but because I needed something solid, something real, something that wasn't just my word against Deborah's. And buried in the estate documents, I found it. My uncle didn't just own the house I inherited. Through a couple LLCs, he owned 8 of the 12 homes in Silver Lake Cove. And the cherry on top, the property management company that handled the Homeowners Association, was tied to him too. Meaning Deborah wasn't the queen of this neighborhood. She was an employee who'd gotten comfortable pretending she owned the throne. The next morning, I met with an attorney named Megan Park, the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste words. She looked at the violations, the vendor quotes, the emergency assessment, my video clips, the record request, and she said, "This isn't enforcement, this is self-dealing." Then she leaned in slightly and added, "If we do this right, she won't just lose her seat, she'll lose everything she used it for." The final meeting was scheduled like a showdown. Deborah sent out a notice, special vote removal of resident privileges. Translation, she was going to try to publicly crush me and scare everyone back into line. The community center was packed shoulder to shoulder. People weren't chatting this time. They were stiff, anxious, angry, mostly at the idea of another surprise bill. Deborah walked in like she was already victorious. She sat at the front table with a little gavel, her board members flanking her, and she opened with that same polished tone. "We are here to protect Silver Lake Cove from disruption." Then she pointed straight at me. "Jack Miller has refused to comply with HOA requirements, has threatened litigation, and has created hostility in our community." I stood up slowly, not dramatic, just steady. Megan stood beside me with a folder, and I could feel Deborah trying to stare me back down like she did on day one. Before Deborah could call for the vote, a man in a county badge, not a resident, not a neighbor, stood up from the side row. He cleared his throat and said, "Before any financial actions are taken, the county needs to address an outstanding matter." Deborah's face drained a shade. He continued, "Deborah Price, you have an unpaid property tax balance of $34,000. The room made this sound not a gasp, more like a collective stunned inhale. Deborah snapped, "That's not relevant." Megan didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She opened the folder and started laying it out piece by piece. Vendor conflicts. Inflated bids. The emergency assessment with no documentation. The harassment pattern. The false 911 call. And then I placed the estate documents on the table. The LLC ownership. The management link. The fact that the board didn't even understand who actually controlled the contracts they'd been rubber stamping. Deborah's mouth moved, but nothing coherent came out. She tried to pivot into outrage. This is an ambush, but the crowd wasn't hers anymore. They were looking at her like they were finally seeing the person behind the blazer. That's when two investigators stepped forward from the back. Calm, no theatrics. One asked her to step aside. Deborah stiffened and said, "You can't do this. I run this association." The investigator didn't argue. He just repeated, "Ma'am, step aside." And in front of everyone, she'd bullied, fined, and intimidated Deborah Price was escorted out, her gavel still sitting on the table like a toy she'd been caught stealing. Lesson: read the rules because the people abusing them are counting on you not to.